Hello, in today's lesson we're going to be talking about sampling and bias. Now the easiest example I can come up with to start with is survey data that is used to try to determine voting preferences prior to an election. And we don't ask every single person in the United States who they plan to vote for, say, president. We ask a sample of the population. So a sample is a smaller portion of the entire population that's available, and that sample is used as a way to represent the group as a whole. So the sample demographics, in theory, should be similar to the population demographics overall. This is typically achieved when the sample is random. We want the random sample to be chosen, as it is said, randomly, to help be representative of the whole group of people. So here's how we do that. In a simple random sample, all we need to do is make sure that every single person selected to be part of the sample is equally likely to be selected as the people who weren't. So in my example, if we look at just one class, so all 22 students in a classroom are assigned a number, and then we choose 5 of those numbers from a hat. And so 5 people are selected randomly from that group of people. In a stratified random sample, we divide the population into different groups. For instance, continuing with the school model, if we wanted to survey the entire school, we could first separate the groups into freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, and then we do a random selection from those groups. So we choose, say, 4 students from each of those grade levels, and we choose them randomly. In a systematic random sample, we choose people to be in the sample based on a specific interval. So my best example here is someone stands at the door and every 10th student that walks in is selected to be part of the sample. So those are examples of how the samples can be randomly selected. Take a moment and pause the video to copy this information down before we move on. Here are some examples of biased surveys. The 2 major types of biased surveys comes from when the survey is done based on people who are convenient. So if we wanted to survey the whole school, but I just happened to walk into the nearest classroom and only ask those kids in there. That is called a convenience survey. Those students were the most easily accessed, and I didn't give every single person in the building an equal opportunity to be chosen. It also stands to reason that if I were to walk into that classroom, I'm walking into a classroom specifically of freshmen or of sophomores or of juniors or of seniors. And so I'm not getting a good demographical representation of the entire building. The other bias survey is via a voluntary response. And so our sample only talks to those who wanted to be involved in the first place. So we say, hey, we're going to do a survey, who wants to take the survey? And we only take the 30 people that raise their hand and say, sure, I'll do it. That's a voluntary response. The sample is going to have to include those that don't necessarily always speak up right away or aren't necessarily as interested in the topic as others. So again, pause the video and copy this down before you move on. So here's an example. A radio call-in show notes that 75% of listeners have a negative view of their local representative. In this survey, identify the population and sample, then determine whether the survey is biased or unbiased. So, what's the population here? Well, the population is all the people that could have participated. And so we'll say that the population is listeners to this station. So that's the people that could have answered this question or given their opinion. So what was actually the sample? Well, not all the listeners called in. The only people that called in are the ones that were sampled, so just callers to this station. So is this biased or unbiased? And the big question to ask ourselves, did every single listener have an opportunity, the same opportunity to have their voice heard? And the answer here is no. Because there are certain people that will never call into the radio station and will happily listen, and there are others that will rarely listen, but when they do, they're happy to call in, or vice versa. So this is a biased survey. And so what type of bias is it? Was it convenience or was it voluntary response? Well, these people selected themselves to be heard, so this is a voluntary response. Bias. Because those people chose themselves to participate in the survey. So this is not a valid survey to say that 75% of people in this area have a negative view of their local representative. It just happened to be those that wanted to call in and have their voices heard at that moment. Okay? So that's our lesson on sampling and bias. We are done.